America is celebrated as the land of the free, a country where every individual can control their own destiny.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Its citizens learn in one of the biggest publicly funded education systems on the planet. But unlike Britain, their national government has very little power over their 95,000 schools, and local freedom has spawned many competing approaches. I'm beginning my education road trip across the states in the rural Midwest, trying to understand this vast school system and the constant fights to control it. Where will my Odyssey take me? Is it right and then left? This is Nebraska, almost 1,000 miles from the coast in any direction. It's right in the middle of the states, but feels like the middle of nowhere. Out here you're free from the constraints of city life, free from the system, free from other people. It's 7 a.m. and I'm calling in at a remote farmstead to head into school with a local youngster, if my slick city boy wheels can get me up the driveway. 6-year-old Leah Anderson starts her day early. Before school, she's out feeding the deer in her back garden. Her parents, Terry and Andrea, have chosen a very independent way of life. You know the phrase that everybody around the world associates with America, the land of the free. Now, as Nebraskans, what does land of the free mean to you?
The way we're living. You tell people where you live and what you do, and they're envious. This is the way we choose to live.
Oh, wow, look at that. Across America, millions of families have their own definition of freedom, and the education system must cater for all of them.
Good job.
Wow. Do you ever miss anything? %89% of American students attend publicly funded state schools, and that's what the Andersons chose for Leah. At the tiny Olive Branch schoolhouse, you can see how the freedom Americans value is built into the very foundations of US education. This school has just 11 pupils in a single classroom, looked after by the multitasking Nancy Bess.
This is a story, it's called The Great Chase. Can you read it to me? It's about Jake.
Education policy is set through the prized American principle of local control.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Power is exercised by a school district, controlled by an elected board and entirely independent of local government. They raise funds through local property taxes, set school budgets, and here they determine the local curriculum within state guidelines. City districts might run hundreds of schools for millions of children, but the district that set policy here looked after just these 11 kids. I asked Nancy Bess where she thought control should lie.
Well, I think it definitely needs to be local. The more local, I think, the better. They know the communities, they know what is best for their children.
But Nebraska is now merging tiny school districts like this into larger ones, reducing the power of parents like Terry.
Prior to this, if you had a problem, you'd call up your neighbor because he's the one that's on the school board, if you weren't on the school board. And you had a lot of direct control.
Every situation is not the same. You want to make all schools equal, and I want them all to be good schools, but not all the situations are the same, and I think that local control is the answer.
But whilst local parents might be losing some of their traditional influence here, teachers like Nancy Bess enjoy a remarkable degree of freedom. Nebraska is unique in the power that it gives classroom teachers over state testing. Now, Nancy, I'm a bit nervous. You've asked me to do a bit of assessment here. I'm, barely able to qualify as a human being. What's the secret of doing this successfully?
Okay, there is no secret. I
Nancy knows these state assessments inside out because she wrote them. Most states impose exams several times a year, but in Nebraska, teachers run continuous assessment with tests they have designed to meet state guidelines. Although it's an awful lot more work for you, is that kind of freedom one of the attractions of the job?
I think it is. Nebraska, I think, is the only state, I know it's the only state in the United States that does this, that gives you the freedom to create your own state test using their standards. If the state sent something out, they may test something that doesn't fit in our local curriculum. So it wouldn't be a fair assessment to the students. I think it's very important that they still have local assessments, and they have faith in us still that we can come up with the assessments that we feel are valid.
Could I ask you to read over this? You can read over it first, and then I'll ask you to read it out and carry out an assessment. Is that okay? Thanks. A justifiable degree of suspicion from the student exhibited there.
A new friend. Anna wanted to become a veterinarian. She loved animals and was always bringing
Phonetic awareness with beginning and ending sounds.
to the frightened animal. Sit still.
But these homegrown exams are also under threat. Not from my clumsy attempt to administer this one, but from a target-setting federal administration. So pass this on to Miss Bess immediately. To find out about their attempt to seize control, I'm going to have to head into town. So we've come in from the splendid isolation of rural Nebraska into Omaha, which isn't actually the capital. Lincoln is the capital, but it's a much bigger place. So the task in Omaha here is I'm hoping to speak to somebody who's really important, the Commissioner for State Schools in Nebraska. Constitutionally, education is a state matter, but many urban schools are failing, and the federal government want to increase their power to tackle the problems. In Washington in 2002, the Bush administration introduced No Child Left Behind, a federal bill which would standardize testing and reporting across America and kill off Nebraska's locally produced tests. In a Victorian schoolhouse in Omaha's Heritage Museum, I met Doug Christensen. He's a staunch defender of the Nebraskan way of doing things and one of the bill's fiercest critics. So Douglas, what's your problem with No Child Left Behind? It sounds like a high-principled initiative.
Well, it does sound like a high-principled initiative, but the theories of action, of implementation of it, are all wrong. And No Child Left Behind is probably the first evidence of industrial strength centralization of something that's always been a local, state issue. And basically, I think the major theory of action behind No Child Left Behind is that the federal government knows better than we do what needs to be done in Nebraska, and that's simply unacceptable.
Well, why have they done this, though? Because it's not like education's in the Constitution. Why has federal intervention happened at this stage?
If there's a reason why it exists, is because some states were not doing the job they needed to do. I think they were leaving children behind. And so we've got some states that need some help. They need some push. They need a kick. But is this the right way to do it? I don't think it's the right way to do it. Our system is one that honors the work of teachers. And we think that's the worst message that No Child Left Behind sends, is that it doesn't honor the work of educators. We're not forcing anything into the classroom. It begins there. We expect the rest of the system to embrace the classroom. And we think you can aggregate that accountability upward. It doesn't need to come from the outside or from the top down. And our teachers own this.
Doug won concessions that have allowed Nebraska to keep its local assessment. Other states rebel too, and No Child Left Behind looks likely to be revised. But the tension between national and local remains. There are two major social flashpoints in the states, religion and race, and both have sparked power battles in the schools. The African American population have not forgotten the injustices they suffered under slavery, then segregation. And the equality that they gained in the 60s has not translated into educational success for their children. Here in Omaha, like many urban areas across the states, almost half will fail to graduate high school. Dale Gines and his wife chose to opt out of the state system and home educate their children instead.
L6, so circle the letter.
What do you get out of educating your children at home as opposed to sending them to the local public school?
I think the main difference is I get to set their culture and their worldview. I can teach them about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey. And this way it gives me the flexibility to make sure that they know their basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also to teach them things that I know that they wouldn't normally learn in a public school system.
Has there been a failure in public schools in Omaha?
Omaha as a whole has over 25% of their high school graduates go on to get a bachelor's degree in college. In this particular area, it's only 7%. I think there's some organizational and bureaucratic issues that I don't think that are flexible enough to meet the demands of a minority population that's in a lower income bracket. If we get to the point where I feel that our schools are once again culturally sensitive, that are teaching a broad range of American history instead of just the narrow history that they teach now, and they are committed to reducing the educational gaps, I would love to put my child or my children back in public school.
While Dale exercises control by withholding his kids from the public school system, I'm on my way to meet someone else who's trying to give the black community greater control of the system itself, and he's based in the Nebraskan State Senate. Now, if you're going to have a local government building, that's the sort of building you should have, a majestic chunk of American 30s deco, at the heart of which hopefully sits Senator Ernie Chambers. A veteran of the black civil rights movement, Ernie Chambers is the only black state senator in a very white state. Getting a feeling of Joseph Kafka. So many endless corridors, so many doors. Where is the Chambers chamber? The senator has triggered a national row with a bill that will split the Omaha school district in three, effectively creating separate white, Latino and black controlled areas. I'm keen to hear the man's plans, if I can find him. Right back where we started. Finally, Ernie's office is home to mountains of paper, a collection of dumbbells, and the immaculate Nicole. Could you tell us a little bit about your plans for the public schools in Omaha and the change around the districts, which will, I believe you hope, empower the people that actually live there?
Yes. Right now, there are in effect two education systems in Omaha. The white children go to one type of school, non-whites to the other. In the white schools, they have the more experienced teachers, the better equipment, adequate textbooks, funding, and all of the things that go along with the concept of a school. In the area where our children go to school, we get the teachers with the least experience. And when you look at the test scores, white children scored in the high 70 percentile, the black children in the mid 20 to low 20s.
And that's a kind of historical thing that hasn't changed, I believe.
And it's worse now than it had been 10 years ago. So my view is that until black people get the control and the governance of our schools, our children are always going to fail.